get your mic on.
Oh, it's on. Big time. You guys ready over there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. on Wednesday, October the 13th. I'd like to call this Personnel Committee meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public have been duly notified in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Our first order of business on the agenda is approval of previous meetings minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Moving on to citizen comments. We don't have any citizens in the audience. Any comments submitted?
No,
For the
sir.
record. Okay. Moving on to old business, we're going to start with an update on the wage and compensation analysis report. I have met with the city administrator on this. I don't know, Desiree, if you want me to kick things off or if you would like to.
Go ahead. You want to set it up, and then I have some information just hot off the press that I would like to share with you, show you all, and then kind of walk you through.
Okay, great. So the last time this discussion was in our committee, we more or less said, hey, we've given the council our recommendations from a philosophical, principled standpoint on what we think needs to happen for wage and comp. And now it's working through the numbers with wages. That's roughly where we left off. But I want to recap some of the things that I believe we've agreed upon, both as a committee as well as a council, just to make sure that that foundation is still clear and that there's still agreement there, because there are some additional decisions and recommendations that we should make to Ways and Means for the next Ways and Means meeting. And I think it's pretty straightforward. Number one is we believe that for Isle of Palms to be able to attract and retain top talent, we need to pay wages that are above average. That's point number one. Because of our proximity, because of the level of service that we require, or excuse me, that we want, that we think our citizens want, we believe that it is not just important and not just a good thing to do, but actually necessary to attract the right type of people and keep them, that we need to be above average. So that's number one. Tenet number one. Tenet number two is that we need to, shoot, I forgot my tenet number two. That maybe the tenet number one was the big thing.
Make sure the plan is sustainable.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. We want sustainability in our plans from a financial standpoint. We don't want to, we want to pay people as much as we can, obviously, but we can't just, we don't have a blank check. We don't have carte blanche. We don't have unlimited funds. We have a pretty constrained population, and therefore our core predictable known income streams of property taxes are not going to grow without tax increases. So we have an idea of how much we're going to be able to afford from that standpoint. And so the other tenet was sustainability. We want to make sure that our policies don't put future councils in a position where we're creating a deficit and or having to raise taxes year over year over year. So those were the two things: competitive pay and sustainability, and achieving the balance of those two things. And I know that there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot that we've discussed above and beyond that, but those were the two things that kind of surfaced as I kind of reflected on what are the things that council and this committee have discussed. So I guess I want to kind of just throw that out there to both of y'all and get some reactions to say, is there any other core things? Just because I think those are critical for our future discussions based on the new data that Desiree's going to give us.
And I think it probably, next section, it probably goes to sustainability, is the idea of consistency. You know, before we've had other councils come in, change the way payroll is done, change the way merit or COLA or whatever is done. I think this is setting a good groundwork for future councils and future administrations to rely on, to have consistent payroll policies throughout anybody's tenure here in the city.
I think that would be a good third tenet for sure. Like there's consistency or predictability, all of those things kind of the same.
Correct.
Agreed.
Just quick comment. I'm big on process and policy, right? So future councils shouldn't have to go through this level of angst every time there's wage conversation. So I think what we've done, a nice job of putting something in place that is sustainable. And it's not just, you know, does it fit within an affordability envelope? It's some predictability for employees. It's some predictability for a constantly turning council, so that we're not, again, it's been many years since this has been done here, and it has taken painful long steps to get here, but we'll leave behind something that shouldn't need to be rethought again for a number of years.
Cool. All right, so before Desiree hands this out, thank you for that. Both of you agree with everything you added. When Evergreen provided a final analysis with some different options, and you're going to see some data that looks similar to the analyses that we've already received in the past with some new options. And at the core of these is actually getting into the nitty gritty of, okay, what is the actual implication at the aggregate level to our budget, to our staff? What kind of increases are we looking at across the board? And to really kind of decide which of these directions we want to take, we need to understand and really target the goals that we had. Why did we do this? So we have these tenets that we talked about. We want to be competitive. We want to be sustainable. We want to be consistent. Those three things are true. But we also had some very specific goals. When you do a wage and compensation analysis, typically you're saying, well, we want to make sure that we're addressing turnover. Are there areas where we have a lot of vacancies where turnover is a problem? And frankly, there's one department where nationally across the board, because of a whole myriad of different factors, attracting talent, attracting candidates, and keeping them is incredibly challenging. And that's in the police department. You know, that's where we have 6 vacancies right now, I believe.
Correct.
And that is without a doubt the most difficult historically for us. And again, this isn't just an Isle of Palms problem. It's not related to us. It's related to everything. And we don't talk about all the stuff that's happening in the news and whatever with regard to the police departments, but it's just really hard to bring people into those roles. And so for us, we know that is the area that we have to say, hey, we really have some challenges here in terms of recruiting and being fully staffed. That's not to say we don't have challenges in the other areas, but in terms of which department do we have the absolute biggest challenge, that's one. That's our number one when we're looking at it just from an objective standpoint of turnover, retention, attraction, those types of things. Those are objectively easy for us to measure. And actually, I asked Desiree if she could get some historical data kind of on turnover and vacancies and things of that nature. And I don't know if you can kind of share what you've
Yes.
got.
We do, and we have a copy for each of you. We focused on both police and fire for the last 3 years. For fire, the turnover rate for FY21 was 6%, 13% for FY20, and 6% for FY19. For the police department, 16% for FY20 compared to 6% in the fire department, 10% in FY20 compared to the 13% in FY20 for fire, and 29% for FY19. We also calculated the turnover rate for the police department currently year-to-date FY22, and it's at 38%, and 0 in the fire department. We are fully staffed. We will have 1 vacancy starting, I believe, today.
Quick question. Voluntary, involuntary. So this is, I'm assuming, voluntary turnover.
Correct.
So again, just kind of laying out a couple of things. I wanted to point that out is when it comes to vacancies and again, trying to attract applicants, that's maybe not captured in the data very well. When we have openings in the police department versus any other position we have in the city, the number of applications we receive is significantly lower than anything else. And I'm assuming we don't have numbers on that, but anecdotally, we have the staff here who review those resumes, and we talked about this yesterday. Like that is, can you just make a quick comment in terms of the volume of applications we get for police versus everything else?
Yeah, so for police, it's about maybe 1 application every 3 weeks. From there, the fire department, we have carryover from the last application time period. And I reached out and did recruitment with them last week and have about half returned saying they would want to be considered for a candidate. We're going to post today. The last time period for the fire department, we have well over 70 applications.
So, you know, in the fire department and the police department, we've been interviewing, trying to do one a week right now, just because we have to vet through a lot of stuff before we can interview for them. I can tell you out of the last 4 candidates, we've selected 2 to move on forward at this time.
Okay.
One
So-
thing that just to, our current climate, one thing that we're gonna see people wanting to move into applying for work here at the city is the vaccine mandates are impacting employment in some of our neighboring communities. So
Uh-huh.
that's something that, you know, could potentially impact the number of applicants that we have for some of these positions.
Got it. Thank you. So the point that I wanted to just illustrate was there's one department where we have an obvious challenge with recruitment because there just aren't people who want to necessarily work in that field. That's, to me, that's the bottom line. Again, national data to support that. And so when we look at the way that we adjust, we have previously had been taking we have general government, which is everything other than public safety. We have public safety. We're treating them as 2 separate. We can still take that approach. The data that Desiree is going to provide considers maybe 3 different buckets: general, police, and fire. And so for the sake of the discussion today, recognizing like, hey, we have this one specific goal. We do have a challenge with police. It has been a historic issue. Do we potentially want to treat them differently or not? And so that's why I present that information, that data. And I guess, yeah, let's go ahead and put the options in front of everyone.
Yeah, and once y'all have the document that Janice is distributing, I'll kind of walk you through the whole thing. You have several options.
Thank you.
Depending how aggressive the city wants to be with both police and fire in terms of the one-time adjustments and the adjustments to salary ranges moving forward. So what you'll see in front of
Yeah,
you.
Desiree, before you do that, John, just,
Let me just finish one more of my thoughts before I hand it off. I just wanted mostly for the public's sake, anyone who's watching this, right now, we are talking about this one-time adjustment. I know that y'all know that versus the ongoing. I think we've all felt committee level, council level, that our ongoing approaches to the hybrid step versus step performance-based increases for public safety and then the performance-based increases elsewhere. Everyone felt like that was one of those consistency, Ryan, to your point, that ongoing methodology, everyone felt really good about that. We're not discussing that now. We're talking about, hey, this is a point in time adjustment that we're going to make that will have obviously implications moving forward for the duration of the city. But we are talking about a one-time adjustment to the ranges. So that's what this discussion is centered around today. So there you go. Go ahead.
yeah, I tried this when I first got on council, which was some flexible creativity in how we address these jobs and the benefits that come with them versus pay. So just a comment on police. You can't solve with pay things that can't be solved with pay, right? This national problem that we have with recruiting policemen is not going to be solved with pay. We won't be at a deficit compared to other communities, but I suspect we're still going to have issues. And I'm not trying to reintroduce this thought, but I had asked through multiple police chiefs now to think outside the box about, you know, how do we differentiate? One time I recommended that a police take-home car be optional, that we give a car allowance for people that might think that's a better option. You come here and you use a car. Please don't, going forward, lose the outside the box thinking.
Mhm.
Because I don't think you're going to solve the police problem in general with pay increases, right? I think we're going to still struggle with lots of issues. And I think honestly, it's a time to get really creative and think about what could we do different. We are a different community. We've got some new attributes like a Marine unit and other things that go way beyond, you know, are we going to adjust by a couple of $1,000s and pretend that we've solved the problem? So that's.
Point.
Okay, so in front of you, you have a couple of documents, and I'll just kind of ground us all with what I've provided. You have the current pay plan, and that is classified by position and job description. Then you have the minimum, the midpoint, and the maximum as it stands today. The second page, you have by department, the same titles with proposed changes to those titles. The proposed grade, so now positions are categorized by grade, not necessarily by just the title. So you'll have people in different departments fall within the same range between the same proposed grade. That's the number on the fifth column. Then you have 3 columns that depict the change, the percentage change from the minimum, midpoint, and maximum from those original or current pay plan. So you'll see the difference between existing and proposed, what that percentage change, increase or decrease. There are some that are adjusted on the other side based on the market analysis conducted by Evergreen. Then we wanted to focus on police and fire. The third page you have in your packet includes both the fire and police pay plan summary. This shows the average market position. So when you compare to like communities, neighboring communities, what's the average position for those different grades compared to the market? You see that there is a 10% grade progression between grades. So PO1, that's a patrol officer certified. PO2 is a corporal, lieutenant, sergeant, and captain. So that's the progression in those grades. Similar progression in the fire department. And that's the difference between grades, it's a 10% increase. Then you also have, we've provided for discussion, just going back to what Councilmember Moy said, that we were tasked to look at not just being on the average of the market, but going above that. How can we be more competitive than the market? So we have an option here that shows what that would look like at the 60th percentile and 70th percentile. So you'll see that, for example, just taking one position as an example, patrol officer, the average market position for a patrol officer that's certified would start at a $43,000 minimum. The 60th percentile, that number goes up to 44,500 and 46,500 at the 70th percentile. So we have run all those numbers depending on how aggressive we want to be. Same thing for the fire department. So let's take a firefighter, for example, at the average market rate, it would start at a minimum $40,000. At a 60th percentile, it would be 41,500. And at the 70th percentile, it would be a $43,000. Historically, across the nation, there is a difference between the starting pay for a police officer certified and a firefighter. That's just across the board. There's usually a couple $1,000 difference in that categorization.
So Desiree, if I can.
Sure.
Fire pay is a little more complicated because it's not just base salary. And I've had this conversation so many times with Chief Graham when she was here about mandatory overtime. So just so everybody understands, and maybe all of us, when I look at this and I go, okay, wow, we're only paying firefighters, $41,000 or $45,000. There is a component of mandatory overtime based on scheduling. It would be helpful to me, at least, to understand what that average total comp looks like, not what the minimum, because when you say we're going to make this adjustment in fire, it carries into mandatory overtime. And I think the community needs to understand, given some of the commentary I've heard about, fire, that is not how we're compensating our firefighters, that our firefighters have by grade, an average payout, that is not what we're seeing in this chart.
So this is base salary.
I
You are
know.
correct. The mandatory overtime for the fire department based on schedule for those that work on shift, that is on average of $3,500 to $4,000 a year. That is if they work the minimum by their shift, no discretionary overtime included, that would be added to this number. But
Okay.
you're correct. There is an added component based on shift that the fire department has, that the police
And I
department
make that
does
as
not.
a comment because I think the general public looked at this and we've heard all this stuff out. We're only paying X amount per hour and all this stuff, which is not exactly true. And that there's components of this that for those of us that sat through this for multiple years now understand a little better than the public. Thank you.
And one comment on that, Desiree, my understanding is the methodology used by Evergreen takes that into account. They're not just looking at, they're not comparing base to base. They're taking total compensation packages when they're doing their comparisons. Am I
So
correct?
no,
not
they're,
correct.
they are just looking at the base salary
Okay.
because the mandatory overtime component is based on how their shift works. So our shift works 24/48. There are other components that work 48/72. So that is not built into this number.
Okay, thank you.
But the key word is mandatory, right? Because there's nobody that signs up for this plan that will not get the minimum mandatory on top of this.
Correct,
So we ought to be cognizant of that.
correct.
Yeah.
And that number is between $3,500 to $4,000 on average. Okay, so you've seen the average and then two different options that go above the average for both police and fire. And then the last 2 pages just show the aggregate summary of what the implementation cost would be depending on what options the city decides to move forward with. Again, these are roughly preliminary numbers. They may change slightly as we still have identified a couple of, one-offs and adding people that are now that have been hired to fill vacancies. So however, the numbers won't change that dramatically. So when you look at the options on the last 2 pages, you have the current range penetration capped at midpoint for general employees. And we've talked about what that option, what the goal of that option is situate people where they are in the current range at that same rate, put them in the new range, but capping that percentage increase at the midpoint. The second option is something that we've been looking at in an effort to make the plan somewhat sustainable and reasonable, is for general employees, we would look at the current range penetration capped at midpoint, but also capping the maximum adjustment percentage at 7.5. And the reason we looked at that, when you look at the average percentage salary adjustment for general employees at the first option, current range penetration capped at midpoint, the average percent salary adjustment for general employees is 9.7%. When you look at the other options with police and fire, we were trying to find another option that provides some parity and fairness across the board, so that general employees on average are getting a similar adjustment based on average percentages than their police and fire. So the first 2 options apply just to general employees. Then the 4 options that you have following those include the step placement by tenure, and this would apply to police and fire only. Then there are a couple of combinations. Then you have the total cost if the adjustment for both police and fire happen at the 60th percentile. Another option that shows the impact of putting the adjustments at the 70th percentile for both police and fire. And then it also shows the average if we just wanted to do the average compared to market. That's the last option. And then there's another option that shows police at the 70th percentile and fire at the 60th percentile. So both are competitive. Both are above market. However, police would be, an option would be to focus on police in a little bit more aggressive way, just because of the current issues that we're seeing with vacancies and the challenges with recruiting and retention in that particular field. So you could still do both above average, still be competitive, but maybe do something above that for that particular department. That's another option for you all to consider. And you can see through this option, this schedule, it shows you the total implementation cost, the number of employees receiving adjustments. That doesn't change dramatically between the different options. What changes obviously is the average percent salary adjustment for employees. I'll stop right there before we kind of go through the forecast based on some of these different options.
I'm gonna make one comment. I do want to give Ryan a chance, Randy. So you probably picked up on, as I was doing my opening without the data in front of you, that this option to be a little more aggressive with police is my personal recommendation, where I feel like we should lead. And I'll tell you, a big part of the reason I got there is looking at the average percent salary adjustment. I'm in favor of the current range capped at midpoint with 7.5% cap for general, that second option, and then the orange one right underneath it for fire and police. And I'm going to give my rationale why, and then we can discuss a little bit. Basically, police feels like the most challenging place for us, and then fire would be right underneath that. And so, from a recruitment, retention, all of those things. So when we look at if we all agree, we can debate whether or not that's the case. That's from my perspective. So that being the case, the average adjustment here kind of cascades appropriately with that, where you have the average increase in adjustment for police is 7.8%, for fire 7.4%, and for general at 6.8%. That just had a good gut past the sniff test for me in terms of prioritization for why we're doing this and what we're trying to address, and being a little aggressive and offering competitive pay and trying to, frankly, address the trouble spots that we know exist. And Randy, I do agree with you. There's a lot of other things other than compensation that we have to be mindful of. We're not going to address those things in our compensation analysis. For me, the compensation analysis is really, if we don't hit a bare minimum threshold, then we're not going to attract the right people anyway. Those other things are what we need to do to make sure to sweeten the pot, but they're not even going to throw their application in the hat if the compensation is too low. So I think what we're doing here is setting the compensation high enough to where people are applying, they're sending interest, and then it's the job of our staff to basically sell the city on all these other things, whether it's the Marine unit with the police or whatever else we have that is compelling for someone to work here, throwing those things in during that process. So anywho, I wanted to just kind of throw out my initial reaction to this was that those two options passed the sniff test for me. They seem like the most logical, but obviously you guys have different perspectives, and Ryan, you have a lot of opportunities to speak. So Randy had his hand up, but
No, it's good. No, John, I agree with you. The fact that we've had staffing shortages in the police department for some time, and we are having a hard time filling this position. And so it comes down to basic market analysis. I mean, you have to raise those wages up in order to get the appropriate people there. And I agree with you on this, where we're going with it. And we need to do what we can in order to get those positions filled and get the right people in those positions. But now I look at this, I know there's other communities watching what we're doing right now. And it'll be interesting to see how many people start, jumping on doing what we're doing as well, as soon as we go through and pass this. And that kind of puts a little fear in my belly, a little bit too. But I think the fact that we're getting ahead of it and be on the forefront of it, I think it's gonna do us well.
And one note to that I learned yesterday from Desiree, Mount Pleasant just did an increase for fire.
Mhm.
This option, the 60th percentile, puts us ahead of them at an equivalent skill level for fire. So we have different requirements for entry level. Theirs are much higher than ours.
Right.
So their entry level pay is actually higher than ours, but the same person entering Mount Pleasant would be getting paid more, roughly 500 to 1,000 more here.
On out, yeah.
Same scale. So the more apples to apples comparison, we are offering greater
Yep.
compensation to Mount
No,
Pleasant
I agree. Yeah.
on what they just did. So that's, I mean, again, from a sniff test, it's like, yeah, we're passing.
Yep.
We are compensating higher than our neighbors, and we're not, we don't want to get into like a pricing war.
No.
But,
Not at all.
And for police, for a starting police certified officer, we would be about $1,000 more than their starting salary in Mount Pleasant if we adjust them at the 70th percentile.
all right,
Just,
I'm
just,
sorry.
no, it's fine. I looked at this in detail 3+ years ago with Debbie Suggs, and the only thing that I think everyone, because we're gonna get asked many questions about this, and we looked at that time, say we had 90 employees, the top 15 employees comprise X amount of total city salary, right? So when you start, and I look at that for, first part, whether it's 7% or 9%, 9% of a big number is a lot different than 9% of a small number, right? So when we look at these percentages at the low end of the wage scale, and we look at the general categories that we have, non-police and fire, I think we got to be very cognizant of what percentage of our employee base is consuming what percentage of the salary adjustments, right? Because this thing goes on forever. And I did that trend line with Debbie Suggs. God, Desiree, it's been 3 years ago at least. And her initial reaction was, this is not sustainable, right? Because the things that we're talking about, I think you need to take a really hard look at that high end wage scale and those percentages and see where it takes us as a percentage of total available monies. And it's Janice, it's a tweak to what Debbie did. I want to say 3 years ago, because I spent a considerable amount of time with her looking at it. I said, because I'm always concerned, I just simply, 10% of 40,000 is 4,000, 10% of 80,000 it gets a little bit higher.
Well,
like double.
Before you jump in, Desiree, I'm sorry, I'm gonna cut you off because I want to give a couple things. Number one is I think that's a salient point for sure, and I have some comments directly on it. But before I get to those, we are talking about a broad scale change to policy versus individual stuff. And I understand the importance of those individuals, especially when they're a disproportionate amount of our budget, to your point. But I wanted to try really hard to take out those individual sort of outliers as much as possible and say, hey, we're implementing policy that will persist above and beyond the people in the roles
That's right.
that we have right now. And so that needs to be kind of at the forefront. And so really the question shouldn't be, what's going on with these, and I know you're not pointing out individuals, you're
Nope.
just saying the roles specifically. We have to look at the methodology. We have to say, do we ascribe to this methodology? Do we believe in it? Because we've invested a lot in the research of this study to say, if we believe these are the roles that our city needs to persist and engage with the community at the appropriate levels, and the experts and the research are telling us this is what you need to pay people in those roles. If we agree with the methodology, if we agree with the makeup of the city, I don't think that it's incumbent on us to figure out how do we pay for it. And if we can't, then we have to say, well, we need to drop service levels somewhere. But that's really the discussion that we need to be having, because this was about we want our
John, no disagreement, right? And I'm not challenging what we're doing. I do believe there's a point with this fiction that this city can continue to grow wage and stuff and not raise taxes. There is an intersect point at some time when you say doing the right thing has some other consequences. So when we say we're trying to create sustainability, everybody should be clear. Sustainability might mean raising taxes. It might be doing other things, because you can't, when we looked at this, 3-4 years ago, we had raised city salaries on average 50% over a 10-year period, right? So when I look at this, that was the number that was given at the time. Looking back over a 10-year period, right? Or the portion of what we paid, there was, I'm sure, some growth in headcount there as well. But I don't think you can go on a fairly steep curve. And by the way, I fully support doing this, so everybody's clear. I'm not arguing against this. Everybody should have their eyes open. So when we proudly at the end of every council cycle go, wow, and we didn't raise taxes, we're not growing revenue bases in a way to pay for this, right? Our ATAX monies are going up. Very little of the ATAX money is being contributed to this, right? So we have inflection points ahead of this city that everybody just needs to have their eyes open on. And John, I'm fully supportive of what we're doing, so I don't want to come across like I'm not. I think we have to do this, but I think we have to do it with our eyes open.
Go ahead, Desiree.
Yeah, just a point, fully understand, and this is, part of the conversation that council has had for the past 4 years, and our attempt to make it sustainable and make sure that the majority of the dollars are allocated to the problem areas that we have is where we went through, and the recommended approach was capping it at midpoint. So there are folks that are even in the new range, their current annual salary puts them above that midpoint. They would not be receiving any adjustments as part of this one-time adjustment process. They would still be eligible for performance-based increases year after year, that we basically were forecasting it at about 2.5%. So same rate moving forward. On top of that, we've also made a recommendation to cap the adjustments for general employees where we don't have a big turnover issue, right? I mean, we don't. Capping that at 7.5 to make it somewhat, create some parity among departments. So I think that this approach on these recommendations take into account the fact that we don't have that big of an issue at the top end. We want to focus at the, below the midpoint, and those positions that are harder to recruit or harder to maintain, without not, certainly recognizing the value of those folks that have been here for a long time and are at the higher end of the range. But I think that there is a confidence that comes through a third-party evaluation and research to say, okay, well, those folks are being compensated at a very competitive rate. So if we lose somebody, it won't be because we're not paying them a competitive rate. And I think that was part of the reason why I was such a advocate and really encourage city council to support moving forward in this direction rather than, us doing it whenever an issue came forward, doing something, very thorough and transparent and comprehensive across the board so that our staff has the confidence that they're being compensated fairly, and not only fairly, but, above market for, those departments that we have a bigger issue in recruiting. So I think we've solved that with the options that we're presenting it by capping it at midpoint and then capping the increase at a reasonable 7.5%.
So
the other piece of paper that I've shared with you all shows the comparison of our FY22 budget versus two options, the 70th percentile for police and fire, 60th percentile for police and fire. We have the same impact for the different options for the 70th percentile for police and 60th for fire. That one is not in your packet, but you can kind of extrapolate that it would be somewhere in between. Just as a reminder, the FY22 budget included $100,000 for salary and wage adjustments based on this report and $31,000 in fringes. The budget also included $178,000 for fire department. But as you know, we've created a position. Those funds, those dollars have been assigned to that. And then the remaining, not all, but the remaining is included it's still in the budget. So it's monies that we can use to support this initiative. So when you look at the first or the second section on the schedule, you can see the impact for FY22 of the most aggressive option for both police and fire. The impact to the FY22 budget is $26,440. The reason why that number is so low is because we're looking at a 6-month impact. These adjustments would take effect on 1/1/21. This forecast continues to assume a 2.5 annual merit pool. Just keep that in mind. The other reason why the forecasted number for FY '22 in both options is lower is that the FY '22 budget included a 1% retirement contribution by the city. That was delayed because of COVID. So that 1% retirement contribution is included in the forecasted years. It's not in FY '22. But that's not
Just
savings.
Mandatory 1%.
Correct. It's not savings. It's just a delay.
Yeah, that's not a choice plan. We
Cor-
have to do
correct.
that.
So we're looking at roughly between the most aggressive option, we're looking at a $200,000 to $220,000 increase to FY '22 budget numbers in the forecast, if that's implemented. That's just for salaries. You look at the subtotal for fringes, that is ultimately in FY '21 comes out at a 1.2 increase and a 3.3 increase for salaries from FY '22. At the bottom, you can see what the fully loaded FTE cost would be in the forecast. You see, we're looking at 100, current budget numbers would be 102,302 for forecast FY '26. And with the most aggressive 70th percentile for both police and fire, we're looking at 104,944. Then you can see the same impact if you go through the 60th percentile from average for both police and fire, and the option for general employees, it's capped at midpoint and capped at a 7.5 percentage adjustment for those other departments. Our goal is to present to Ways and Means. So at the Ways and Means meeting next Tuesday, we're going to have our consultant from Evergreen to talk through the methodology, make sure everybody fully understands what went through to get to these numbers. And then we'll have another detailed conversation about the options for implementation and what the impact of the budget would be. We will include with these two options, the third option that we talked about today, which would be both police and fire an above market rate, but then something a little bit more aggressive for police to try to address maybe the current vacancy situation that we have encountered. So you'll be able to see all three options, forecast it out for the next 5 years.
Isn't Ways and Means expecting the recommendation from us? Or no?
I think it would behoove us to come with a recommendation. I think it would help Ways and Means have a more productive discussion. So at least there's something to
And we
react to.
We can do that in the, looking at, is it an actionable item that we can? I don't know if we need a vote.
I don't know if we need a vote.
You may not, I mean,
There's an update.
it's just, it's listed on the agenda as an update. I think you all can have a discussion here that gives us a little bit more direction about what you as council members would be recommending to your fellow colleagues
I
at
think we're on
next
board with
Tuesday.
that.
Okay, I mean, again, the message is we want to be above average. We want to be competitive, and we want to use wages to set competitive rates as possible in the areas where we have as much problems, so we can attract talent in addition to everything else that we need to do. So yeah, I think we're, any other comments?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that was going to be a big one. We got another big one right behind us. All right, moving on to old business item B, discussion of upcoming vacancies in boards and commissions and consideration of reappointments and new applications. In your packet, you have all of the applications for the different vacancies. I guess let's start off. We got them in order on page 5 of your packet, or is that page 4? Page 4 of your packet has kind of the full list of everybody by position sought. So Board of Zoning Appeals is first. We have 3 applicants for 2 openings, I believe.
That's correct.
And Desiree, will you, from a staffing perspective, are there specific statutes or backgrounds of individuals that lend themselves to, hey, this is the type of person, like a planning commission oftentimes we like to see people with engineering backgrounds,
Mhm.
and diversity throughout the island in terms of locations. Are there other things from a staffing level that you think, hey, we've heard from Douglas or we've seen in the past that these types of backgrounds are a really good asset for the
Mhm.
city?
Well, I'll start with BOZA. We heard from Douglas last month about the recommendation for, or the desire and, for continuity when it comes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They do act like a quasi judicial board. And there is a lot of value in the knowledge and understanding of precedents. And the two members that are up for, whose terms expires at the end of this year, they've been serving in the BOZA board for many, many years. And the recommendation would be to keep them in place. They do bring a wealth of knowledge. I know that the committee had made somewhat of an informal policy to evaluate new vacancies moving forward and trying to give people, opportunity to serve in these voluntary boards. However, I think BOZA is somewhat different than maybe ATAX and Planning Commission. And the recommendation from the staff was for the committee and council to reappoint Arnold Carrig and Glenn Thunberg for those vacancies.
And just for the record, the other members on BOZA, do you have at hand the length of terms that we're talking about continuity? And we need continuity, but we also need a healthy degree of turnover
Mhm.
in those committees. How new are the people that are currently on BOZA?
I don't know the exact years, but I know Elizabeth Campson, she's the chair.
Uh-huh.
She has been serving for just a couple of years.
Uh-huh.
It's maybe 2, I believe.
And
I know
didn't we
that,
just reappoint somebody to a
Co-
vacancy last year?
correct. So yeah, you have a somewhat of a diversity in terms of how,
Tenure.
new people and, yeah, in terms of tenure. Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts, or do we want to handle BOZA? Let's go committee by committee. So do I hear any motions?
I'll make a motion to appoint the two continuing members.
Second.
Carrig and Thornburg. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So for Planning Commission, we have 4 vacancies, and 2 of the 4 members whose terms expire at the end of this year, they were appointed last year, so they haven't served a full term. They were appointed to serve unexpired terms. Those are Scott Pierce and Marty Brown. I think at the last meeting, there was a conversation about wanting to reappoint those consistent to the informal policy that y'all have sort of used to guide your decision-making on these appointments. So we have two vacancies then for members that have been serving for several terms. And that is Lisa Stafford's position and Ron Denton. We've reached out to them multiple times, encouraging them if they wanted to continue to serve to submit an application. We received one from Ron Denton. He's still interested in serving. And we've received an additional 4 from other members, new members. One is Alex Cattell, who I think was a candidate for council and has withdrawn from the race and is interested in getting involved with the Planning Commission and the city. David Guilford, Stephen Morris, and Suzanne Nagelski. And you can see their occupation and their resumes and applications are included in the packet. Ron Denton is an architect. That's some of the background that he brings in to the Planning Commission. And Lisa, I believe her occupation, she's a real estate consultant and I don't know, a real estate person.
So first question, do we need to do anything for the 2 continuing members? Do we?
Well, we've got four spots.
Yeah.
We've got 2 that, per our informal policy, didn't need to reapply, that we can reappoint
Yeah.
without having to necessarily interview or vet them because they just
we
went through
need
that
an
process.
action.
But we do need action on those 2. But essentially, the formal, the technical position we find ourselves in is we have 7 interested parties for 4 vacancies. And so if we decide to take those 2 off the table, which is kind of what we discussed in our last meeting, that would be Marty Brown and Scott Pierce, then we have 2 vacancies and 5 people.
So can I start? I'll make a motion that we continue with the 2 that filled, that stepped in.
My recommendation would be to wait until you know who you're appointing for the other 2 and just do one motion
Okay.
appointing whoever you want for the
I
4
withdraw that
vacancies.
motion.
That way you
I
don't
was
have 2
trying to
different
make
motions.
it.
So I would say for planning commission, the process we've taken since my tenure here on council has been to interview these candidates. They're pretty, they've got a very involved role with the city and with city council. And having just kind of moved from the BOZA, because of the nature of that appointment, I didn't feel like it was necessary. With planning commission, I think it is important that we interview and at least have a discussion, much more informal than a typical, than a job interview, more just a chance for the 3 of us to ask a question or 2 each of the candidates in a way that could be done virtually or here in person, whatever. But I think it behooves us. We're bringing on at least 1 new person who has not been on planning commission will be appointed. And so I think it's important that we speak with each of these people. So that's my recommendation is let's schedule interviews with these 5.
Okay.
Okay.
We can do that. And then
Perfect.
we'll do it in between this meeting and your next scheduled meeting so that by the next scheduled meeting, you may have a recommendation to city council
For
for December.
November council, we can make
Yep.
a recommendation.
Yes, sir.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll schedule that and contact you all for availability this week.
Great. And then we've got the board code, the building code board of appeals, which hasn't met for 20 some odd years. So I mean, it just feels weird that we have to do this for code, or
Well, you
can we
have
just
to-
say, can we do it as needed? Like, if this is needed, can
That is
can this
my-
committee
Appoint somebody.
appoint somebody? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. If the need arises that somehow that hasn't happened in 20 years and somebody needs to appeal a decision by the building official, then at that point, we can appoint.
A quorum or people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, it doesn't feel.
Yeah.
I don't know, John, if that job pays, I might want it.
They're all voluntary, and again, having met in a long time, so I would just,
Yeah.
I would leave the vacancies as it is
Yeah.
and until needed.
Kind of like jury duty.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other
Mm-mm.
salient points for the boards and commissions?
Nope.
Anything else you need from us, Desiree?
No, sir.
Great. All right, last item under old business is an update on the chief hiring process. Even though this is being handled by staff, I asked Desiree to put this on here so that we could give an update at the council meeting this month.
Yeah. So as you all know, council allocated some funds to help us seek some guidance in the process for the hiring of the fire chief. We've evaluated 4 different firms and their background and expertise, particularly when it comes to public safety. We have selected a group from North Carolina, Developmental Associates. They have a very strong and tested experience in public safety, police, and fire. They have helped, at least in the past several years, 16 fire chiefs in the selection process for municipalities, and a similar number for police chiefs. So their niche is police and fire. So Janice has reached out to her counterparts in municipalities that have used this firm, and they come very, very highly recommended. So the next step right now is we're reviewing the contract so that we can engage their services. And then we'll be putting together a timeline. The average of time, we're looking at about 3 to 4 months from starting to end. Hopefully we can get it done in 3 months. As you all know, we have an interim fire chief that's with us. His arrangement with us is for up to 5 months, 3 months and an additional option for 2 months. And so the goal would be to have this process happen concurrently so that the department may be handed over to the new permanent fire chief when that process is completed.
Great, thank you. And when do you expect to officially engage?
This week.
This week, sorry.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any questions? Okay, moving on to new business. We have discussion and consideration of establishing the Spirit of the Island Award to recognize a remarkable single achievement or action by the citizen of the island. It's a companion award to the Signal 30 Award. So Councilmember Ward suggested this at the last council meeting or brought it up for discussion. And essentially, mirroring what the state has done, where there's the highest level of achievement that you can accomplish within the state, which is the Order of the Palmetto, I believe.
Yes, sir.
I don't remember what the second. Does anybody
The
remember?
Crescent.
Crescent, yes.
Thank you. Kind of mirroring that, where there's different thresholds of achieving each award, that it felt like maybe there was an opportunity from his perspective for us to recognize achievements of citizens and others with maybe not quite as, the Signal 30 is such a strong,
Mhm.
difficult threshold to pass, that maybe there's another threshold that probably has an equal amount of applicants, but maybe we can acknowledge folks at a different level and make sure that we maintain the Signal 30 as this incredibly high bar to achieve. So I'm trying to recapture what I understood from Councilmember Ward. I asked to have this on the agenda so we could discuss. I'm in favor of it. I think it giving opportunities to recognize and acknowledge achievements of our citizens is a positive thing for the community. So yeah, go ahead.
Just honestly, with one personnel committee meeting left, it's not a whether I'm in favor or not in favor of it, but it should be a higher priority for the next council than for us to try to define and do something between now and another personnel committee. I think we've got other appointments that need to be made, interviews that need to be made, and I would recommend that it stay on the agenda, but recognize that we've got one more meeting. So, getting something defined and pushed through in this council cycle, frankly, doesn't make any sense to me. So that's my thoughts.
Right, and I don't believe that we'll foresee it getting pushed through in this council cycle. I think it's something that's going to sustain, and it's going to take probably a couple of
It will.
meetings to figure this thing out. But I agree, I mean, with what Jimmy put forward, and I think we've kind of looked at the Signal 30 Award as more of a life safety award. Where and that's where it comes from. It comes from police code for, and fire code for life safety type of situations. I think that's where that award needs to go. And there's a lot of other folks that are doing good things throughout the island. And if we can just designate life safety versus, the volunteerism that we see throughout the city.
I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I chatted with Jimmy afterwards, and the notion of the state actually has very clear guidelines for how these awards are both kind of nominated and kind of vetted. And it felt like that we don't have the same degree of objectivity that comes into evaluating, hey, is this person qualified to meet this? If we're holding the standard very high. And actually, I think this goes to both of your points in terms of what we need to do. I actually think we need to, in terms of promoting this, which I do think that we should, we need to lump in the Signal 30 and figure out how do we actually award that? Because not that it's arbitrary when it comes to this committee, but frankly, it's going to be difficult when there's so many wonderful people. If you put somebody wonderful in front of you, it puts this committee in a difficult position to say, well, they're wonderful, but they're not deserving of this award when we don't have that clarity. And so I think that's actually, again, it isn't just, 1 or 2 meetings. It's going to take a little bit for the personnel committee and the new council to figure out what that looks like. So I would say, Desiree, I don't know that we need to rehash it in our next meeting in November, but putting that on the agenda, for personnel is kind of one of the points of order. It's actually, I think it's probably a really good item for a new council to take
I would
on.
agree.
It's not going to be highly controversial. it'll help build camaraderie and collaboration. I'm not trying to be all touchy-feely here, but I actually think that's a really good first topic to discuss for a new body, because we know
Yeah,
there's
we
gonna be
had
a lot of new
such
people
an
up here.
easy time with the Signal 30 with Beach Santa that, you talk about process, no, we're not gonna vote for Beach Santa, right?
So I think that the guidance for us is to maybe provide some recommendations of what guidelines for both the Signal 30 and what this other companion award would look like, and present that to the new personnel committee at the beginning of the year.
But yeah,
And then keep it as an agenda item, so that it moves forward with the new council.
all right. And last item under new business is discussion of the zoning administrator job description. I'll hand this off to city staff.
Sure. Well, the very procedural process action here. We talked last month about my recommendation to create a zoning administrator position down at the building department that can complement Douglas's oversight of the department, as well as taking on the role of deputy during my absence. So this is a job description. It's a draft. We're still working through with it. It will be included in the final report with the wage and compensation analysis. So they'll be assigned to a different grade. It's a non-supervisory role. It would be responsible for basically implementing and enforcing building codes, reviewing permits, and everything else that's listed in that job description. But I wanted to give you the copy of the draft of the job description and suggest or request that you all make a recommendation for approval. Historically, we've had the personnel committee approve new job descriptions, and this is that.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Cool. There you go. No additional new business, miscellaneous business. The only thing on the agenda is the next meeting, Tuesday, November the 9th at 9 a.m.
And it doesn't follow your typical schedule because November
Election,
2nd is the election. So I just went ahead and put it for the following Tuesday, if that's okay with you.
Perfect.
Yep.
That'll work.
It's good.
Okay.
And
Motion to adjourn?
I do have one other, sorry, before
good.
we do that, miscellaneous business, and this is on me. I had a council member request that we add something to the agenda, and I totally forgot. I'm gonna blame baby. But so we won't have this discussion today, but the consideration of increasing the stipend for city council members, which I don't know the last time it was increased, but I know surrounding cities like Charleston is increasing theirs. So as three of us that are leaving council at least,
Right.
The request was, hey, this might be a good time for that to be, it's a difficult thing to do. I don't have a position right now. So the question was, do we want to put it on a future agenda? That's really my question to you.
Yeah, and this is up to you guys, but on a 2/3 vote, we can add it under miscellaneous business if you want to have that discussion, since it wasn't put on the agenda.
I feel like in the sake, because it's dealing with
Mhm.
pay to council members, not doing that would be
The optics is,
not great. Yeah. I'd rather not have the discussion today.
Okay.
I'd rather have plenty of notice to the public.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I guess let's put that on the next agenda. We can discuss it, and you have a month to
Mhm.
let it simmer and get your position. I'm not sure where I stand. I can make arguments in both ways.
Same here.
Yeah. So
Do
It's a
you
tough
want
one.
us to research what other
that
neighboring
would be
communities?
fantastic. Yeah.
Desiree, can I ask that you research some that may be getting raises, may not have health benefits and other
Yeah.
pieces. So I think there's more to it
Sure.
than do
Yep.
you just raise the pay?
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Motion
now,
to adjourn.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.